And of course, we are going to talk about the title race. Let's get straight into it, Janusz. I want to actually talk about how impressed you are that Arsenal have ensured that this does go down to the final day this season.
Yeah, I mean, as we've been talking, they've learned. They have the experience of last season. They have the belief, and it's just incredible. If they were to lose that one, it's certainly not because of lack of quality or anything else for that matter, right? It's that one night, that one loss somewhere during the season where, at the time, you may not think about it too much, but in the final analysis, it hurts you. But regardless of who wins it here, I don't think there's going to be any questions about is that being deserved or not. Arsenal have been absolutely tremendous this year. Repeat it again. I thought that for the most part, they played the best football as well.
Okay, so Dalen, we know that you are an Arsenal fan, so we'll be talking about that, and as well as what some of the odds are telling us as well, because I know there's some interesting stuff there. But on the Arsenal side of things, and being an Arsenal fan, is it a bit discouraging that for another season it could just end up being that you were so close, but not close enough?
No, okay. No, we're going to be positive here, because it's not over. So let's pump the brakes there. There's still hope. There's still possibility. We'll see what happens if City can drop some points at Tottenham, and that changes the whole equation. But as Janusz mentioned, there was progress from last year. But if you build on that even further, there's progress from 2 years ago. Remember, down the stretch, it was just trying to get back in the Champions League, just to hear that song again like we got to hear this year, got to see the European nights, despite them sputtering out earlier than I think most Gunners fans hoped and thought they would, despite falling to Bayern. I think there was still the chance 2 years ago was to get into the top four. They capitulate down the stretch. They cannot get there. They go into fifth. It's heartbreaking. Last year, it's okay. Did we make this step? Can we really compete and hold on all year and push City to the brink? Couldn't do it. Last 4 weeks, it was pretty much done and dusted. They struggled in April, and that pretty much locked up everything as early April as we went toward the end of the season. This year, again, is progress, is building blocks on that great foundation, and big pieces come in like Declan Rice. Obviously, Trossard has had a huge impact, particularly in the second half of the season this year. You have continued building this foundation, and progress has been made. And I will be honest with you, before the year, I did not place a bet for them to win the Premier League. It was to finish in the top two, because that was my expectation. It would be them and City at the end, and can they find a way to push them to the very end and somehow nick it? And this is it. They have a shot here. They have a chance, and it really is positive when you look at the future. Again, if you're building these blocks year over year, yes, next year I think they should compete with City. Who knows what that team will look like, what pieces they lose. Arsenal seems very much intact. There is no question who the manager is, who's running things in the front office. Ownership is behind them. You've heard about the money they're going to invest in the summer. Everything is lined up for this Arsenal team in terms of also the age of the players and the chemistry of these players to continue to grow in the right direction. So there's nothing discouraging about this year. If we can get it, we got it to the final day of the season. It will still be a game. Things will matter on Sunday, and they still have a shot to win this thing. That's a great year.
Definitely a great year, Janusz. And as Dalen just said, it is an upward trend, but there's more to be done in the summer. What would you like to see changed for next season, Janusz? What do you think they need?
Well, for both teams, there's some issues, right? I think the hunger is going to be there. The one unfortunate part, just to finish, you thought, Dalen, was that they've gotten closer with what we think, or against a team that we think that wasn't as strong, because Manchester City were nowhere near last season, right? They continue to bleed players. And when I think about the opportunity lost perhaps here for Arsenal, not having Kevin De Bruyne for, half the season, obviously, right? I mean, you have Erling Haaland, who's still scoring a huge amount of goals, but not as much as well. So that's an opportunity loss. I think what's going to change that for Arsenal is I thought about it. Does it take a great player? I don't necessarily think that. They need 3 or 4 squad players, very young players who are going to be able to do this again. And what I mean by that is, if you look at Mikel Arteta, Pep Guardiola, if you watch Liverpool against Aston Villa yesterday, Unai Emery, although Jurgen Klopp to a certain degree as well, this high press, nonstop running. We often talk about quality, and I sometimes think about, as a former player, what it takes to press and counter press like these teams do, right? I mean, it's not a coincidence that some of these players, Rodri said he's tired, he needs time off, right? You saw Moussa Diaby yesterday cramping up. I mean, all these different competitions in this particular way that these teams play, it's going to matter more what sort of young players that they get that are not only hungry, but can answer the demands of that type of football. And in many ways, of course, Mikel Arteta, Pep Guardiola are the same. But it struck me even more so when I was watching Liverpool against Aston Villa, because we know how much risk they take. how much pressing, and in particular counter pressing, there is for these teams that we're talking about title, right? Liverpool, Man City, Arsenal, and who knows if Unai Emery builds on that, he may be in that situation. So if I look at Arsenal, I'm thinking to myself, first and foremost, somebody that can step in for Martin Odegaard. I don't care how much everybody tells me who the best player is. Well, I respect everybody's opinion, but I think the brain and everything that's good that happens with Arsenal is Martin Odegaard, because not only is he the playmaker, but he starts the pressing, he counter presses, he defends, and then on top of that, he does everything else, right? In all of that. So there's got to be somebody, because they've been lucky, Dalen, right? When you think of Arsenal in terms of overall injuries, they've been relatively lucky in comparison to everybody else. That's the feeling I get. If he goes out, say, for 2 months next season, that's a massive problem. And then the depth of the bench. Yes, Timber's going to be back, but if you look at, other than, who's coming off the bench? And Nketiah, I don't think that's the answer, right? Rose Smith, I don't think that's the answer. Vieira, when you start looking deeper and deeper, I think that's when they come up short.
I think you're dead right on, Janusz. There's a couple things there. You're right. Last year, the reason they did swoon down the end, remember Saliba was hurt, and that they're defensively they were a different team without him. This year, Saliba and Gabriel, I believe, played 35 straight matches together as center back pairing. On their best defensive team in the league in terms of goals conceded, but that is a team effort. But having those guys anchor things every single game is huge. And to your point, I think when you look at who they need to bring in, every Arsenal fan is going to talk striker. Everybody's going to say pure goal scorer. I think Havertz has found a position in there to be comfortable with, not a true goal scorer. Jesus, we know, same thing, not a true goal scorer. Everybody's going to say that. And yeah, if you want to throw a bunch of money at that, okay, I'm not going to be mad at it. I don't know if you need to find solutions there, but there are bigger things, other things to do in this team. And you mentioned squad players. It is that back line for me. Can Timber, we know he's an outside back, but you heard, okay, he might be able to play centrally as well. Ben White has been converted essentially to an outside back. Would he have to go centrally if somebody gets hurt to provide some depth? Kivior, is he the answer? There's questions on that back line too, beyond the Odegaard point you just made. And I also think if Partey is going to leave, and we don't know how many miles Jorginho's got left, you see what Rice has been able to do is he's been pushed forward a little bit and allowed to be a box-to-box midfielder, and how effective he's been in goal contributions and just how he's influenced the game on both sides of the ball, particularly in the second half of the season. If you can find somebody to play that kind of Partey role and play in that space and allow Rice to stay there. We know Rice is great in front of the back four. We've seen that at multiple clubs now, and we've seen that all over and internationally as well for him. But he really does something special for Arsenal. He's allowed to push forward a little bit. So how they do those things as well as look at a striker is really important next year. Last thing I will say is you mentioned City. Did they kind of miss an opportunity because City was down? Guys, I do think you have to praise what City has built. They are machine-like. I mean, they are Drago and Rocky IV before the final fight. They are built out of a lab with an amazing coach, unlimited funds, and all these players on the field that we expect them to never drop points in the world's toughest league. That's kind of crazy when you look at it. Their level's been so high for them to take a step back. Shouldn't be shocking to us, given they just came off a treble last year. They're doing things that you've never seen in the Premier League before in terms of consecutive years won the league. This level that they've been at, it seems unsustainable. And the fact that we're surprised that they take a step back and are still atop the league, and still we all seem to credit Arsenal may have played the best football over the year, but Arsenal needs City to lose for them to have a chance to win. That's how good City has been. And I don't know if we can always expect it to be that way.
Are they going to be as good as they need to be, though, City, Janusz, throughout for what we've got left now?
Here's the way. I always find myself contradicting myself in a way.
I know, but it's fine. Every week things change. Change opinions too.
Machine like, obviously, what are they? Unbeaten, 32, 33 games. It's incredible they do, because still the difference is for me that as much as Arsenal control games, they're still nowhere near, I think, to what City are capable of doing, even when they don't succeed, right? And because I've mentioned that, because you said squad players, and I know what you mean, but they can't be just any squad player. What he has to do, and he understands that because he's been in that Manchester City dressing room, Mikel Arteta, is to create this competitive atmosphere, right? This culture in there where they're good players. They're not just anybody that can, is young and can run and is hungry, but it has to be where they fully understand what that role is. And that's why nothing ever changes with Manchester City. The flip side and the little worry, of course, with City is that I just think that every year Pep Guardiola has been great in finding that player that replaces the great, right? The David Silva obviously was one, and we never thought they were going to change that, right? But now, if, for example, Bernardo leaves, last year was Gundogan, and Gundogan was incredible, not because of his experience necessarily, that's important, but he's the sort of player that just doesn't panic in key moments. And who knows, maybe in the Champions League this year, in that game against Real Madrid, they just needed that player who'd hold on to the ball that extra second for somebody to get open, right? Because those players with the tempo and how I've mentioned pressing, counter pressing, sometimes all you have is a second, and they just missed him a little bit. If Bernardo Silva leaves, okay, Foden can get better. Maybe Oscar Bob now becomes the next project and he goes in there. But I just have a feeling when year in and year out, you lose this, what we should say, top-notch player that could come back and haunt you a little bit. And this will be Arsenal's chance, I suppose, to get this hungry bunch now who came up close. And then with the addition of those players that can play through all these competitions at that sustained level that they play. I'm talking about pace and just the ability to win the ball and take a lot of risk, play high and all that. Maybe Arsenal will have a chance, but it's not going to be easy.
No, of course. And just to stay there with that point that you're making, Janusz, so yes, obviously you're going to need the talent of a player that has to replace another. But the big part of what Pep does is make any player he gets who's willing to learn better.
Yes, and look, I mean, he's shown that he can do that, but I just sometimes you just think about of being part of any team. When somebody special leaves, it sometimes takes time to do that. I mean, look at Phil Foden, right? I mean, and even now, let's say, although he's been wonderful this season, there's still games where he kind of stays away, right? Like somebody like Bernardo Silva, I can't recall a bad game, or maybe there's one or two, right? So yes, he's been able to make them better, but within a season, it's just always hard to say, now, Phil Foden, this is yours. Or let's say it's Oscar Bob or somebody else that they'll get from the outside and say, okay, to understand our process and the way you play, and wow, look, we have Arsenal. I don't necessarily think that Liverpool is going to be any worse. We see Villa with that same sort of intensity. Maybe they get a little bit better. So all I'm saying is I know that Pep will get it right, but there's always that window of opportunity. And again, Bernardo Silva hasn't left yet, but if he does, I think that's a massive blow.
And you can't always assume Pep does get it right, but sometimes players aren't always the right fit for Pep and for that type of pressure and that type of demand that manager puts on you, but also the expectation of what that shirt has represented the last 5 to 10 years. You look at Jack Grealish as a guy that's he was supposed to be this, and he's still very talented, but he's not really what you thought you were getting when you pay nine figures in a transfer fee to get him to come to City. So I think there are questions around how they continue as that team ages in different places, how they do respond and return and resupply this level of talent and guys that actually do fit. And that's where I think your point of where Arsenal is next year, I think they know what fits with everybody coming back. It's the questions, to your point, of adding in quality players to push them beyond squad players, but guys that can play and step up and provide competition, but also maintain a level of understanding. Now, again, that's not easy to do either for Mikel Arteta, just like it's not always easy to do with City, despite how much money you may spend on a player does not guarantee success, obviously.
It's the injuries that worries me. That's what differentiates everything. And we've seen it this year for more, some teams can recover. Liverpool, obviously they were in a rebuild. They had their issues with injuries, but I just think that these teams play, as I've said, in a particular way. And this is something that you can't forecast. And because you play so many games, so many competitions, I think in the past it was a little bit easier. I think it's the strength of the quality of Manchester City that gets them to the point where they are right now. Because it's not easy. A lot of players coming into Manchester City are big names, knowing that they, may play every other game. That is not easy to do it. I think Mikel Arteta paid attention when he was at City to that. I think he understands that the next step is to get these players that are, for the most part, unselfish, have the quality. So when 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe 6 or 7 or 8 injuries come in, you can get through that time. because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about Manchester United, Newcastle, Villa, Liverpool. I mean, at one point of another, you have not just one or two key players out. You have sometimes 5, 6, or 7 players out. That's the difference, I think.
This is also a year we have Euros and a Copa going on, an expanded Copa too. So this summer is just more high-level, intense football for all these guys.
There you go.
It absolutely is, and more high-level, intense analysis right here on ESPN FC Live. So be sure to be with us all summer for that as well. We'll be following it. I would like to talk, because we're less than, at the time of this recording, we're less than 3 hours away from kickoff between Spurs and City. Dalen, what's the betting landscape looking like right now? What have we got here? There's the Ozil. Come on, you Spurs.
City are huge. Oh, here's Mesut. Oh, no, this does feel weird, man. Whether analogy, kissing your sister, rooting for it's not comfortable. None of this is good. This is not. I don't enjoy this at all. But I'll tell you what. I contemplated like buying a Spurs jersey this past week. I'm like, we're gonna go all. I mean, let's go. My brother's a Spurs fan, which is it's bizarre. Obviously, Americans can have a kind of you become an adopted team. So in the same family, having 2 teams, so that happens in North London as well sometimes on opposite sides of this rivalry. But yeah, it's really odd to be sitting here in a couple hours rooting so hard for Spurs. Also explaining to my 5-year-old daughter, why are we not cheering for Arsenal? Well, we are, baby, but I'm good with the math and understand the table. She'll get through. She'll get it. Just take some time. And then she'll walk me in the room. This is the bookies, though. See City is massive favorites. They're minus 260 on ESPN Bet. And if you look at different books across the world, it's about the same odds. But if you look at it from that standpoint, you got to bet $260 to win 100. So they are massive favorites. Tottenham is 5-1 on their money to win straight up. A draw is plus 450. So they really are leaning that somebody's going to get a result here. And the way that Tottenham plays a lot of times, they think City is going to do that, despite the fact that City has struggled at Tottenham at the new stadium. They've not played well. They've not scored a goal in Premier League competition. I don't know. I don't likely think the Spurs are going to win, but they don't need to win. They just need to draw. So I think it could be an interesting game. The bookies also expect a lot of goals. Over 3.5 goals is minus 150. Same thing. Got to bet 150 to win $100. So there is a lot of people think there'll be a lot of goals. Maybe this game will be tighter. Maybe there's some opportunity. Said Janusz, he's not going to do it. Maybe zag a little bit here. Take the under. Sprinkle a little bit of value there. Plus, I
kind of like it. I kind of like the fact, if I were a City supporter, that they have to win. I think the danger would have been because they do have to win. They drop points here, and Arsenal win the title for me on the last day at home. So I think the fact that they faced this situation so many times, right? When there's a must-win situation, for the most part, they do it, and so I think City still. I'm not going to go away on the pretty much last game of the season away from Manchester City, so I'm sticking with them.
Okay, Janusz as well, though. Where do you think there's more likely to be a slip? Where history says there would be, here at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium or against West Ham on the final day?
Yeah, I told you West Ham before the show, but I've changed my mind during it, right? Because if they win it, simply because if they win it today, then yeah, it's not happening. So this is the game. This is the game. This is the game because it's a must-win situation. As you've said, draw. I think it's Arsenal's title.
And I think it's interesting too that like Tottenham fans, obviously they'll take an L because obviously Arsenal loses in turn. But there's talk about that on social media and Twitter, and you see people saying that. And Ange was asked about that. I think that's ridiculous to the players. You're going to have 65,000 people there, and you get a chance to play City and play spoiler to a team that everybody thinks is they're not going to win the Champions League, but still probably the best team in the world. I think you're putting the boots on ready to play. As soon as you get tackles are flying and you're playing a game at that level that City has to win, I think they're going to come in intense and give a full-on performance. I know their fans may not care about the result ultimately because they don't want Arsenal to have the door open for them to win the title. But I think you're going to see an interesting game. I don't think they get it done, but Ange's team's going to come out and play the way they're going to play. Like they're not going to change the way they play. So I think the level of excitement of the game and level of intensity will be from the kickoff, and I'm hoping that City has a misstep, but I don't think that's likely.
You don't think it's going to happen?
No.
But what do you expect from the game then, Janusz? How do you expect it to play out, given what's at stake?
I think the usual story, right? Control of the game. That's going to be Manchester City. Spurs will feel comfortable with that. Still on the counter, I think. Even though they're playing home, they understand who they're playing against. They won't be favorites in that one, so that's sometimes helpful as well. So control. I suppose for City, it's easy to say the longer this goes, the more pressure there is. But that's true. We've seen that from time to time. That if you organize well enough, the game against Real Madrid comes to mind as well. Clearly the better team, but they didn't find a way. ultimately. So early goal, I think, to get that voodoo out for them. But yeah, I mean, Son's going to have an unbelievable game, because on the counter, I think he's the one that kind of leads that, and he's fully capable of hurting you just by himself on the counter. So yeah, you have to be perfect. But I think, Ange and Spurs need that as well, because there's been some question asked of them. So I think to finish a season on a good note, say drawing or beating Manchester City, goes a long way in the eyes of the supporters.